The sound hit first. Not a shout, not a scream, but a voice cutting through the polite murmur of wedding guests, amplified just enough by the microphone the DJ had handed her for her toast. My mother, standing there, a glass of champagne held high, a smile plastered on her face that didn't reach her eyes. They were fixed on me, hard and cold, even from the distance of the head table. She cleared her throat, the sound scraping like fingernails on a chalkboard inside my skull. The murmur died down completely. All eyes were on her perfectly styled hair, her expensive dress, the picture of maternal pride she presented to the world. Then the words came, clean, sharp, aimed directly at my chest. "We're all so happy for Sarah today," she began, saccharine sweet. "She's finally found someone to take care of her." A few nervous chuckles. Then she leaned into the microphone, dropping the sweetness, her voice carrying a performative weariness that was sickeningly familiar. "Honestly, it's a huge relief. You see, Sarah, she's always been a burden to this family." The air left the room. I felt it physically. The collective gasp, the stunned silence that followed wasn't just auditory. It was a pressure, heavy and suffocating. My husband, Michael, sitting beside me, went rigid. I couldn't breathe. My dress felt like a cage. The lights of the ballroom, moments before warm and festive, now felt like harsh spotlights on my humiliation. Every single face in the room, friends, family, Michael's colleagues, turning to stare at the bride who was publicly labeled a burden by her own mother at her own wedding. The clinking of glassware, the faint music playing in the background, it all seemed to stop. Time warped. The smile stayed on her face, a triumphant, cruel thing. She took a sip of her champagne, watching my face crumple, watching the shock and shame wash over me. It was deliberate. Every single word. Every single calculated pause. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This wasn't nerves or too much alcohol. This was a performance, years in the making, delivered at the moment she knew it would inflict maximum damage. She had chosen my wedding day, the one day I was supposed to feel cherished and celebrated, to tear me down completely, to ensure everyone present understood her narrative of my life. I was the weight dragging them down, the problem child, the expense, the disappointment, the burden. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. To understand that moment, you have to understand everything that came before it. My entire life, it felt like I was existing under a microscope, constantly judged, constantly found wanting, especially by my mother. She had this picture in her head of who I should be, what I should do, and I rarely, if ever, fit it. Growing up, money was always a source of tension in our house, but not in the way you might think. We weren't poor. Far from it. My father was a successful businessman, providing a comfortable, often lavish, life. The tension wasn't about lack. It was about control. And my mother used money, or the perception of it, as her primary weapon. From the time I was small, every request, every need, felt like an imposition. New shoes? Do you really need those? Money doesn't grow on trees. A school trip? That's going to be expensive. Are you sure you're worth the cost? My siblings, my older brother Mark and younger sister Emily, seemed to navigate this landscape more easily. Mark was the golden child, effortlessly achieving the academic and social milestones my mother valued. Emily was the sweet, compliant one, mirroring my mother's opinions and desires. I was the outlier. I questioned things. I had different interests. I wasn't naturally gifted in the areas they prioritized. I preferred books to ballet, quiet observation to social performance. This difference, in my mother's eyes, translated directly into monetary value. My lack of conformity was somehow costing her. Pocket money wasn't a given. It was a reward, often withheld. Privileges were tied to performance, not just in school, but in fitting her mold. If I messed up, if I expressed an opinion she disagreed with, if I didn't behave exactly as she expected in front of guests, the consequences often involved lectures about how much I took, how much I required, how I was a drain on the family resources. It was relentless, a drip, drip, drip of financial guilt layered with emotional manipulation. "We sacrificed so much for you," became her mantra. "You don't appreciate how much you cost us." The irony was suffocating. I saw the cars, the vacations, the clothes. We weren't struggling. This wasn't about necessity, it was about power. My mother had found a way to infantilize me, to keep me beholden to her, by framing my very existence, my needs, my growth, as a financial burden she magnanimously bore. She cultivated this image not just for me, but for others. Casual mentions to family friends about how much Sarah's education is setting us back, or the expense of Sarah's hobbies, painted a picture of a demanding, costly child, absolving herself of any blame if I didn't turn out exactly as she wished. It was brilliant in its cruelty, creating a narrative that justified her lack of emotional warmth or support by framing me as inherently difficult and expensive. By the time I was an adult, trying to find my own way, this narrative was deeply ingrained. Getting a job, moving out, trying to become independent, every step was met with passive aggression or outright claims that I wasn't contributing enough, that I was still relying on them in invisible ways, or that my choices, like pursuing a less lucrative career path than she preferred, were financially irresponsible and therefore, somehow, still a burden to her. Renting my first apartment? Well, that's a lot of money wasted when you could be saving for a house, but I guess that's your choice, even if it's not a smart one. Buying used car? Oh, that old thing? I suppose it gets you from A to B, but it will probably just cost you more in repairs. More expenses, everything circled back to cost, and my perceived inability or unwillingness to minimize it, thus making me a burden. Finding Michael was like finding an anchor in a storm. He saw me. Not the version my mother had created, but the person beneath the layers of insecurity and guilt she had carefully constructed. He saw my strengths, my resilience, my capacity for love and joy. He came from a different kind of family, supportive, open, where love wasn't transactional and money wasn't a weapon. He was a successful engineer, grounded and kind. He listened to the fragmented stories I told about my childhood, connecting the dots I hadn't fully understood myself. He didn't try to fix my family dynamic. He simply offered unwavering support and a perspective that slowly, gently, helped me see the reality of the situation, not just my mother's manufactured version. When we decided to get married, I knew the wedding would be another flashpoint for my mother's control and her burden narrative. Traditionally, the bride's family contributes significantly to the wedding costs. For years, my mother had made veiled comments about the expense of my eventual wedding, even when I was a teenager. It was just another facet of the looming financial burden I represented. Michael and I discussed it at length. We were both financially stable. We could afford to pay for the wedding ourselves. More than afford it. Michael's family was also generous and offered to contribute, specifically mentioning they wanted to cover aspects like the rehearsal dinner and helping with floral arrangements. We were incredibly grateful. My father, bless him, detached from my mother's drama, quietly offered a substantial sum, saying he wanted to help us start our lives together. This is where the plan, the quiet, simmering rebellion, began to form. My mother, naturally, inserted herself into the planning immediately. She had opinions on everything. The venue, too expensive, but I suppose if you insist. The dress, not what I would have chosen, and cost how much? The guest list, do you really need to invite them? Think of the catering costs. Every conversation about money was laced with her usual passive aggression, reinforcing the idea that she was somehow shouldering this immense financial load for her burdensome daughter. She acted like she was writing all the checks herself, sighing dramatically about the expenses, making a show of stressing over budgets. In reality, Michael and I were paying for the vast majority of it. We accepted my father's gift and the contributions from Michael's family, channeling those funds into specific parts of the wedding, but the large, underlying expenses, the venue rental, the main catering bill, the photography, the band, we handled. We set up separate accounts, paid vendors directly. We didn't broadcast this to my mother. It felt safer, easier, to let her believe she was in control, that she was the one making these grand, costly decisions for me. It was a twisted kind of peace, born of years of avoiding conflict. We let her fuss and fret and complain about the cost, nodding along, occasionally saying things like, "Yes, Mom, weddings are certainly expensive," which she took as validation of her narrative. Michael watched her performance with a quiet intensity. He saw the manipulation, the way she used the perceived financial contribution, which wasn't even real, to exert emotional pressure. He saw how it still made me flinch, how the old wounds ached. He understood, better than anyone, how deeply her burden narrative had affected me. As the wedding day approached, her stress act escalated. More sighs, more comments about what we're paying for, more unsolicited advice framed as necessary sacrifices she was making. She even made comments to relatives within earshot, things like, "Oh, this wedding is costing an absolute fortune, but you do anything for your children," or, "We're really stretching ourselves thin to give Sarah the day she wants." She was building her narrative, cementing the image of the self-sacrificing mother burdened by her demanding daughter, not just for me, but for the entire guest list. The morning of the wedding was a blur of nervous energy, hairspray, and excited bridesmaids. I tried to push away the knot of anxiety about my mother's inevitable performance. I focused on Michael, on the love and excitement we shared, on the supportive energy of my friends and his family. We had made it here, despite everything. We were building our own life, our own family, free from the weight of the past. The ceremony was beautiful, emotional. Saying our vows, looking into Michael's eyes, felt like stepping into sunshine after years in the shade. The reception began, a joyous celebration. People were laughing, dancing, eating. For a little while, I forgot the history, the tension, the narrative my mother carried. I was just Sarah, married to Michael, surrounded by people who loved us. Then came the toasts. My father went first. He gave a warm, heartfelt speech, talking about his pride in me, his happiness for Michael and me as a couple. No mention of money. No mention of burdens. Just love. I felt a pang of gratitude for his quiet support over the years, his subtle attempts to counteract my mother's influence. My siblings gave short, sweet toasts. Mark, the golden child, surprisingly emotional as he welcomed Michael into the family. Emily, the compliant one, sticking to safe, generic well wishes. They existed in the same family ecosystem, but their experiences with my mother's dynamic were different. They fit her mold better, or perhaps learned to navigate it with less direct conflict. They weren't burdened in the same way I was. Then it was my mother's turn. She stood, microphone in hand, the picture of maternal pride, and delivered her carefully crafted performance. "Sarah, she's always been a burden to this family." The air went out of the room. The silence roared in my ears. Shame, hot and prickly, crawled on my neck. My carefully constructed piece shattered. I looked at Michael, his face a mask of controlled fury. This was it. The culmination of her lifelong campaign. Public, undeniable, designed to wound me in the deepest possible way, in front of everyone I cared about. She finished her toast, something about wishing us happiness, but the words were lost. The burden hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She smiled, that same fixed, cruel smile, and sat down, looking entirely pleased with herself. A few people shifted awkwardly. Some avoided my eyes. Others sent me looks of pity or shock. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. All the joy of the day evaporated, replaced by the familiar, bitter taste of humiliation. Michael squeezed my hand. His grip was firm, grounding. He didn't say anything, but his presence was a shield. He looked from my mother to me, then back at my mother. A slow, deliberate understanding passed between us, without a single word. This was the moment we had, perhaps subconsciously, prepared for. The moment where the quiet rebellion, the hidden truth, had to be unleashed. I felt the shame recede, replaced by a cold, hard anger. Not just for today, but for the lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle attacks. For every time she made me feel like a problem, an expense, a disappointment. This wasn't just about a wedding speech anymore. This was about reclaiming my story, in front of the very audience she had spent my entire life trying to convince of her version. The next toast was supposed to be Michael's best man, but Michael stood up instead. He walked calmly to the microphone, took it from the DJ's hand. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me, a look of fierce love and solidarity that took my breath away. Then he turned to face the room, his expression calm, his eyes locking onto various faces, our friends, his family, my father, my siblings, and finally, resting for just a second on my mother. The room was still buzzing, a low hum of uncomfortable conversation following my mother's toast. Michael cleared his throat. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and strong, cutting through the noise. "Good evening, everyone," he said. His tone was measured, polite, utterly devoid of the emotions swirling beneath the surface. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate with us. It means the world to Sarah and me." He paused, letting the silence gather. Everyone was watching him now, curious. What would the groom say after that? Would he defend me? Ignore it? The tension in the room was palpable. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that was just for me, a silent promise. Then he turned back to the room, his expression shifting slightly, becoming more serious. "Weddings are incredibly special events," he continued. "A time for families to come together, to celebrate love, and to look towards the future." He paused again, his gaze sweeping across the room. When his eyes landed on my mother, the smile vanished completely, replaced by an expression that was both neutral and devastatingly pointed. "My wife Sarah is the most incredible person I know," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "She is generous, kind, brilliant, and possesses a strength that inspires me every single day." He looked at me again, and my heart swelled. "She is my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. And I am the luckiest man in the world to call her my wife." He paused, letting those words hang in the air, a quiet counterpoint to my mother's earlier declaration. He was systematically dismantling her narrative simply by stating the truth of our relationship, of who I was to him. But he wasn't finished. "A lot goes into planning a wedding," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more businesslike, more factual. "It's a complex undertaking, coordinating vendors, timelines, and, of course, managing the finances." He paused, and I saw my mother lean forward slightly, a flicker of her usual self-satisfied control appearing. She probably thought he was about to thank her for her supposed efforts, her supposed financial contribution. His gaze flickered to her again, cold and unwavering. "There's been some discussion tonight about the cost of this wedding," Michael said, his voice clear and carrying every single word to every corner of the room. "And about who has borne that burden." The word hung in the air, echoing her earlier insult. My mother's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face, trying to understand where this was going. She looked confused, wary. Michael's voice dropped slightly, becoming almost conversational, but with a steel edge that was unmistakable. "I want to be completely transparent with all of you, our dear friends and family, tonight. As Sarah's husband, now and forever, her well-being, her happiness, and frankly, her financial security are my responsibility and my privilege." He took a breath. The room was utterly silent again, but this time it was a breathless, anticipatory silence. Something was happening. Something significant. "So, to clarify any misconceptions," Michael stated, his voice rising slightly, clear and strong, "Sarah and I, together, planned and financed this entire wedding ourselves." The statement landed like a bomb. Not a loud explosion, but a shockwave that rippled through the room. Faces turned. Whispers erupted, then died down quickly as people strained to hear more. Michael held up his hand slightly, a gesture for silence that was immediately obeyed. He wasn't angry. He was calm, deliberate, in complete control. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a calculated dismantling. Every vendor, he listed them off slowly, clearly, ticking them off on his fingers as if reviewing a contract. The venue, the catering, the music, the flowers, The photography, every single aspect has been paid for, in full, by Sarah and me. He paused, letting that sink in. The significance was enormous. Not only were we capable of funding our own wedding, proving, unequivocally, that I was not a financial burden, but we had done so while my mother was publicly claiming the opposite, claiming she was sacrificing for me, claiming I was an expense she was begrudgingly covering. The contrast was stark. It exposed her entire performance as a lie. He wasn't finished. He glanced towards my father, offering a small, grateful nod. My father-in-law generously contributed a very meaningful gift, which we have set aside to help us with our first home, and we are incredibly thankful for his love and support. This subtly highlighted the difference in my father's genuine generosity versus my mother's performative complaints. He then looked towards his own parents. And my family has been amazing, covering the lovely rehearsal dinner last night and contributing to elements like the beautiful floral arrangements as a gift to Sarah, which means the world to us. This showed that real family support was happening, but it wasn't the source my mother was claiming, further undermining her. But the core expenses, Michael reiterated, his voice firm, the significant financial investment in creating this day for all of us to share, that responsibility and privilege has been ours alone. He looked directly at my mother. Her face was ashen. The carefully constructed smile was gone. Her eyes, moments before cold and triumphant, were wide with shock and disbelief. She hadn't just been blindsided, she had been utterly exposed. Her entire narrative, the one she had built and maintained for decades, the one she had just performed for the entire room, was crumbling around her in real time. She had thought she was humiliating me, asserting her control one last time. Instead, she had walked directly into a trap she didn't even know existed. Michael's voice softened slightly, losing the factual edge, gaining a quiet, devastating finality. Sarah has never been a burden to anyone, he said, looking at me again, his love a visible aura around him. She has always been a gift, and I am honored to share everything I have, everything I am, with her, including the cost of starting our life together. He raised his glass. To Sarah. To us. To our future. The room erupted. Not in awkward whispers, but in cheers and applause, in shouts of support. People stood, turning towards us, congratulating us, hugging us. The energy shifted completely. The heavy cloud of my mother's words dissipated, replaced by a wave of genuine joy and celebration. And my mother? She sat at the head table, frozen. The color had drained completely from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Her eyes darted around the room, catching the gazes of guests who now looked at her with shock, with dawning understanding, with judgment. They had heard her claim she was bankrolling the wedding while calling me a burden. They had just heard from the groom himself that this was a lie, that we had paid for it ourselves. The contrast between her performance and the reality was damning. She tried to say something, her mouth opening, but no sound came out. She reached for her champagne glass, her hand trembling so violently she nearly knocked it over. My father put a hand on her arm, a gesture that seemed less comforting and more restraining. My siblings looked uncomfortable, avoiding her gaze. In that moment, she wasn't the poised, controlling matriarch anymore. She was just a woman caught in a lie, stripped bare in front of the very people whose opinion she cultivated most carefully. The power she wielded through her narrative of financial control and my supposed burden had been completely neutralized. Not only had we paid for the wedding, proving her wrong in the most public way possible, but in doing so, we had highlighted the falseness of her complaints and the cruelty of her words. We hadn't just refuted her claim, we had revealed the mechanism of her manipulation to everyone. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, but my head held high. Michael came back to the head table, wrapping an arm around my waist. The applause continued. People were coming up to us, hugging us, whispering congratulations not just on the marriage, but on the quiet, powerful way we had handled it. His family beamed with pride. My father gave us a knowing, proud smile. The rest of the reception was different. Lighter. Joyful. It felt like the air had been cleared, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever witnessed my mother's particular brand of manipulation. She was still there, of course, a silent, pale figure at the table. No one went over to talk to her. No one offered her commiseration. She was isolated, not by us, but by the truth Michael had laid bare. For me, the feeling wasn't triumph, not entirely. It was something colder, more complicated. Vindication, certainly. A deep, bone-deep satisfaction in seeing her carefully constructed facade shatter. But also, a profound sadness. This was my mother, the person who was supposed to love and support me unconditionally. And even at my wedding, her instinct was to tear me down. Winning against her felt less like a victory and more like a necessary amputation. We had won the battle for the narrative, for proving my independence and worth, but the cost was the final, irreversible break in any possibility of a real relationship with her. We didn't confront her directly that night. There was no need. Michael's words had said everything that needed to be said. The silence that surrounded her spoke volumes. As we danced our first dance, as we cut the cake, as we celebrated with the people who truly loved us, she remained a solitary, diminished figure. The burden, it turned out, wasn't me. The burden was her own bitterness, her need for control, her inability to see me as anything other than an extension of herself, or a problem to be managed. Leaving the reception that night, walking through a shower of confetti, hand in hand with Michael, felt like walking into a new life in every sense. We weren't just married. We were free. Free from the old narrative, free from the weight of her expectations and manipulations. We had paid for our freedom, quite literally, and the price was worth it. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of our love. It became a declaration of our independence, a testament to our strength as a couple, and a definitive end to the story my mother had tried to write for me. She called me a burden, but in the end, she was the one left carrying the weight of her own lies. The quiet satisfaction of that night, the sense of having reclaimed not just my wedding but my history, stays with me. It wasn't revenge. It was simply stating the facts, facts that exposed the heart of her cruelty. We built our life, our marriage, our home, on a foundation of truth and mutual respect, the opposite of everything I had grown up with. And sometimes, in quiet moments, I remember her face, pale and exposed, in the silence that followed Michael's words. It is a powerful reminder that the truth, quietly and calmly delivered, can be more devastating than any shout. It was our wedding, yes, but it was also the day I stopped being a burden and started being free. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.